All good, let's go.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. It is great to see you all on Friday, almost at the weekend, almost there. My name is Keith Heggett, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Ascalite Learning Design SIG, alongside Dr. Kashmira Dave and Associate Professor Leanne Nyo. We are thrilled to welcome you to our August webinar, which is on a really current topic, which is how do you shift an entire master's degree from blended block mode to asynchronous online over the course of just 1 year. And I will introduce you all to our very special guest in just a moment. But I've got to do the advertisements and the other important things at the start before we get started. So the first thing that I want to do is, of course, an acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of the Learning Design Special Interest Group and Ascalite, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present. I am currently on Darug land near the Darebin River, which is in Western Sydney. And if you'd like to put in the chat window what land you're on, you're more than welcome to do so. And it'd be great to get a bit of an idea of all the different lands that we are coming from today. So a little bit of information about Ascalite. I'm going to go back to this slide because that's got all the information on it. So we're a not-for-profit professional association for those people who use educational technologies in tertiary education. The Learning Design Special Interest Group is just one of many special interest groups. We're the best, obviously, but we're here to be a resource and a network for academics and professionals who are interested in learning design, however you understand that term. What we're trying to do is provide a platform for members to come together and support each other in collegial and collaborative ways. And we aim to do this by providing opportunities for professional development activities, exchanges of ideas, good practices, and discussions of issues and trends that are going to affect all of us in the learning design space. And if you're not a member, I really encourage you to join our SIG and come along to all of these sessions. We do most of our work on Microsoft Teams, where there's lots and lots of discussion going on and all kinds of readings and things like that. And I've just put in the chat window a link to the Microsoft Teams sign-up sheet. So please make use of it there. The other thing that I have to mention is that, of course, Ascalite 2022 is coming up very shortly. I think it's at Sydney University this year, and that link that I've just put there will take you to some details about the conference. It's usually fantastic, and I'm sure the first time in a couple of years that it's face-to-face, it will be wonderful as well. What else do? We have monthly webinars, reading groups, podcasts, and we're starting to talk about developing some LX design labs and collaborative digital communities. So it's a pretty exciting time to be getting involved in the Ascalite and the Learning Design SIG. All right, so preliminaries out of the way, let's get to the main event. And I would like to introduce you to Dr. Amanda Lizzier, who's going to be our presenter today from the University of Technology, Sydney. Amanda has submitted a fantastic bio. I'm looking and saying, gee, I really need to update my bio after reading this one. So I'm going to read it out to you, just verbatim. It is commonly posited that the ways in which we work are changing rapidly and becoming more complex. What is less clear is what this means for learning. Amanda Lizzier's research explores what it means to work and learn in complex contexts. Of special interest is what workplace learning means when the notion of a workplace is multifaceted and where work happens across multiple sites. Informed by her extensive experience as a learning and development practitioner in the corporate sector, Amanda's work and engagement aim to create a conduit between theory and practice, informing and improving workplace learning systems and practices. As a highly regarded learning and development practitioner, Amanda has experience in all aspects of learning and development across an array of industries, particularly in learning and curriculum design. Her practical experience informs her work as a workplace and professional learning researcher and lecturer at the University of Technology, Sydney. Amanda's research uses complexity theory and practice approaches to understand the practices of work and learning in organizations. More recently, Amanda's work has expanded to research leadership in higher education and work integrated learning. And in addition to that fantastic bio, Amanda is also the course coordinator for the Masters of Education, Leadership and Learning at the University of Technology, Sydney. And it's on that topic that she's going to come and speak to us today. And she's going to be speaking, and she had a fantastic name for her presentation, which was Our Year of Living Dangerously, which was a bit of a literary allusion. And it's all about how they shifted an entire master's degree from blended block mode to asynchronous online over the course of 1 year. And that was a challenge posed to their teaching and learning design teams at UTS when the Master of Education, Learning and Leadership was redesigned and relaunched through 2020 and 2021. So in the presentation, we're going to hear from Amanda as she discusses the process the team followed, the zigs and the zags along the way, and the lessons that were learned. What I'm going to do is say we're really looking forward to it, and please, make Amanda feel welcome and tell us all about it, Amanda.
Thanks, Keith. I will just share my screen. But it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be able to actually share our hard-won knowledge. It's been, as you can imagine, quite a year. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wallumedegal people of the Darug Nation, on whose ancestral lands I am today. So, our year of living dangerously. Now, it's me presenting, but I want to acknowledge and celebrate the multitude of people who've worked on this project, because obviously these sort of things do not happen just with one person alone, heaven forbid. And so we have a large team. You can see some of the names there, and I'm sure I've forgotten many, of academics, the teaching team, of the design team. I know Marianne is here today. I just saw her introduce herself. That we all came together to do this. And so although I'm the one talking, you need to picture this sort of army of people standing just to the side of me who also worked on this. So I thought I'd start off with telling you a bit about what this course is and a bit about where it's come from and how we got to here, to give you a bit of context. So it's, as Keith said, the Master of Education, Learning and Leadership. It's got 2 graduate certificates that sit kind of within it, but they all share subjects. So you can see at the top there, Graduate Certificate Education and 1 in Professional and Organisational Learning. The coloured boxes you can see, sort of the red, the orange, the green, which I now realise looks like traffic lights. That wasn't intentional. There is no hidden meaning there. They are the subjects that are delivered as part of that. So if you are to do, for example, the Graduate Certificate in Education, you'd be doing the red boxes. If you're doing the Graduate Certificate Professional and Organisational Learning, you do the orange boxes. And if you're doing the Masters, you do all of the boxes. So it's really designed for professionals who are leading in some capacity or looking to expand their career into more of an educational leadership role. And we get students from absolutely every industry you can possibly imagine: corporate L&D, clinical educators, people that work in government, the public sector, quite a lot of school leaders or aspirational school leaders, so people who are sort of head teacher type roles, subject leads, coordinators, assistant principals, that sort of thing, higher ed, you name it. We've had people, which is actually fantastic for the diversity, the discussions we can have and the examples that we can use. But also, because we've got such a wide range of students, we have a really strong practice focus, by which I mean we try and link wherever we can back to students' own professional practice. So rather than us setting a lot of the tasks, we'll say, here's the task, but you need to link that back to your professional practice. And I'll talk a bit about that as I go on. So how do we get to where we are now? So pre-OPM, and OPM, in case you're not familiar with the title, I'll use it a bit, is Online Program Management. And it's one of the many acronyms that we've been introduced to in the last year. So pre-OPM, pre-COVID even, it was a blended degree. Students did 12 subjects in the regular semester length format, about 11 or 12 weeks, and it was blocks. So students would do some work online, originally using, heaven forbid, Blackboard, but now using Canvas, and they would do 3 to 4 blocks a semester for a whole day on a weekend. So students would come in every sort of 3 or 4 weeks for that 1 day kind of intensive. Now, we'd already had to shift online due to COVID in February 2020. So when we kind of got the news in September 2020, guess what, you're moving into this new format, we were sort of already partway there in a way. We'd already started to get into the headspace of thinking, what would this look like online? And so we also had then the partners keep up as our third party partners with that, which I'll talk a bit about that after. So what began then from October 2020 was a rolling redesign of all of those subjects, and the vast bulk of that was done within that year, and then we had one last elective that got launched this year, so it had a slightly longer design period. And when I say rolling redesign, what happened was the first subject got designed, launched, but we were still designing the next one, launched, you're teaching that one, you're designing one, you're launching one. So it was intense. Okay, so challenges and opportunities, and I've put my little caveat there, a bit with the benefit of hindsight and a bit at the time. And I think if I can position me talking is really from kind of the teaching team, the academic team, but also, you know, obviously in partnership with a lot of other people. But opportunities. Working with more stakeholders, you'll see that's a challenge and an opportunity. I'll get to that. But it really broadened our perspectives. Often, I think, you know, while we've always had a whole of course approach, and I'll talk about that quite a bit, you can get a bit into your own subjects. And, you know, we got to work with a lot more people across UTS and with the third party providers. So we got to broaden our perspectives, challenge ourselves, stretch ourselves as learning designers and as educators, and really question everything. You know, how are these subjects working? Where's the padding? You know, going from 11 weeks to 6, that's a big transition. So we also needed to get creative around some of the parameters that we were given, and really maintaining this whole of course collaborative approach that the teaching team had always had and has served us really well. Also challenging though was having a lot of stakeholders. Some extra layers of approval, policies and procedures that were sort of emerging as we were designing it, which threw up some challenges from time to time because we didn't always have clear answers for questions. And so it was very much a new space that for us, we were working it out as we went. So as I mentioned, going from 11 weeks down to 6, going from blended to online only was quite a challenge. And it really, in some ways, changed how we worked and how we saw ourselves as teachers, and made us ask a lot of interesting questions around what's the role of the teacher in this context. And that's something that I'll talk a bit about later. And also some constraints around how the new format worked, not just in terms of time, but what the expectations were across that time. Just trying to get my mouse to cooperate there. So the design principles that you can see on the screen, we did talk about, they sort of emerged across it. We didn't really set out necessarily to list all of these at the very start of the design process. Certainly we had some of them in place. These kind of emerged as we went. Because we were designing subjects in a rolling sort of way, we could learn from the one before. And so that's how we sort of ended up with these principles. And I talk a bit about the subject arc. When I do design, I talk about the narrative arc of a subject. So that arc needed to happen across 6 weeks. And so, you know, the beginning, the middle, and the end, all the assessments, everything. And we decided as a team that that would be structured around 1 module per week. And it ended up landing somewhere around 3 topics per module, although that kind of varied. So it needed to be asynchronous delivery. And the synchronous sessions were both minimal and optional for students. And they were done via Zoom, and they needed to be attached to assessments. So they weren't for content delivery because they were optional. They were really points of connection, of responding to questions, of doing a slight deeper dive or some discussions into some areas, but certainly the heavy lifting needed to be done by the asynchronous materials online. So therefore it needed to be really well scaffolded. We took an assessment for learning approach and authentic assessment, by which I mean we sort of looked at the 6 weeks and thought, well, to help the students really as well as us, how could we build the activities in Canvas, which is the platform we were using, how could we build those in such a way that it was forwarding, you know, taking the learning forward, but also could build toward the assessment. And so a vast number of the activities that students actually do help them do a portion of the next assessment. That also then means that the feedback we give for assessment has a, I guess, even though they might be what you might call summative assessments, formative style feedback. So not just giving feedback on the current work, but then making suggestions for what students could be doing for sort of the next assessment that built on it. The authentic assessment refers to this practice approach. because students were using as much as possible their own professional practice to talk about. So a lot of our subjects, so there's one I teach, for example, called Designing Innovative Learning, about learning design. It's based around the learning design process. And at the very beginning, students identify something to design, some sort of program, some sort of materials from their own workplace, and then they use that throughout the subject for all of their assessments, and they build one on the other. Amongst all of this, we thought it was really important to maintain the rigor of master's level study, but also be cautious about students' study load, because they're all working and caring and pandemicking and all of the things, as well as us. So students were told, and we were told, the expectation is that students do between 15 and 20 hours a week. So it's a very intensive mode of study. They only do one subject at a time. But how can we structure that in such a way that they're getting the learning without being overwhelmed, and including the time they're working on assessments and things like that? It was very important to us to maintain our, and we won a teaching award for this, our whole of course approach. And I'll talk about that a bit more soon, but making sure that we collaborated as a team. So even though we had responsibility for overseeing our own subject development, making sure that there were common elements and consistency across those subjects to help students orient themselves. So we weren't rethinking every single subject all of the time. So some of the examples are using the same templates. So at the end of every module, excuse me, there's a reflection. So that's the same. There's common getting started modules to help orient students to the subject. There's a little video, the same page at the beginning of each module looks the same, but then we might use different colors, a different color palette in each subject to differentiate a little bit. So some design notes. Now we were working with Keeper as a third-party provider, and we had a choice. We could partner with them for the design, or we could do it in-house. And we decided in the end to do it in-house, partly because frankly it would have cost more, but mainly because we all work in education and we're teaching education. And so we wanted to maintain that sort of a bit more control over the process. So who we partnered with instead was the UTS Internal Learning Design Group. We call them the Postgraduate Learning Design, or PGLD. And that involved negotiation, but really productive negotiation too, because we're all educators. We all have strong opinions, so are they. But ultimately that was quite productive tension in some ways, because we all brought different expertise with us. KeyPath was quite hands-off therefore in the design process, except for some of the parameters around the Zoom sessions, the timing, things like that. And sort of recommendations in speaking with some of their designers around, I've used the word sort of simplify, but it's not quite right, streamlining the content of delivery. And again, being conscious of how much we're asking of students, and a very strong focus on industry involvement wherever possible, which we did. We did a bit of DIY, so we're all based in Sydney, but we were already working from home at this point. So the whole project was done pretty much remotely, particularly during lockdown. So Sydney was locked down for like nearly 4 months at the end of last year. So there's a bit of DIY, learning which part of the house was quiet enough to make videos, finding blank walls, pivoting into doing podcasts instead of videos, all of these sort of things that we needed to upskill ourselves with support from the design and the media team, which was fantastic to have all of us working on it together, and really maintaining this whole of course approach. So as a teaching team, we'd meet weekly to check how we were all going, to share ideas, to discuss. So we weren't designing kind of in a vacuum, because that's no fun. We also had regular meetings with the design team, and we also then had individual subject design meetings, which is really important because we're all working remotely, which sounds like a lot of meetings, and it sort of was. But we really needed that. Because we were remote and because we wanted consistency, we really needed those different touch points. And one thing I've noted there, Marianne will probably smile when she thinks about this one, is sort of things like leaving each other notes in the Canvas build site. So I'd make my notes in yellow and say, can this please be a coloured box, and can you put it over here? And then I'd get them, yep, sure, or have you thought of, or... So we found different ways to collaborate remotely. And negotiating on colours, yes, good point, Marianne. Who gets which colour? I ended up with yellow. So we had a few processes in place. In terms of the overall design process, and I think everyone here will probably appreciate this looks lovely and it looks linear. It's not, but for the purposes of trying to express it on a slide, let's kind of go with it. This is sort of a rough idea of how each subject worked. It's roughly, you would say, an ADDIE type your approach. And I guess from a project management point of view, ADDIE would sort of be the model that was used, although in terms of being what it was informed by, very much learner experience design and also constructive alignment approaches. So very clear upfront on what the learning objectives were, what the assessments were, and then working out kind of, well, what goes in the middle. So that's scoping. And you've got to remember, these were existing subjects mainly to start with. So we did have some materials to begin with. So a lot of work up front, planning out the subject, the flow, the content. We use Miro boards for a lot of this. And early on, identifying different media and interactive assets that we needed, so we had time to build them, because we didn't have an awful lot of time. And one of the first key milestones was a proof of concept for the first module. So we could agree the look and feel, work out the colors, what sort of icons and things like that that we might want, and then we'd start the build. But as you can imagine, there's a bit of toing and froing, because once you take something from a Miro board and start to build it out into a Canvas site, you suddenly notice, oh, that doesn't flow the way I thought, or that topic shouldn't go there, it should go someplace else. So those first few kind of boxes, bit of toing and froing, until we gradually got to what I've always called the fiddly bits. Other readings there, the links work, subject outlines done, all of those bits and pieces. And every subject went completely live with the entire finished subject all 6 weeks at once. Because one of the building blocks of this way of learning is that students can learn at their own pace, anywhere, anytime. And so the whole subject needed to be ready, so students could work ahead if they wanted to, basically. So the idea was, once you launch, you're not making any big changes anymore, but we keep a change log, and then we kind of make the changes, and they kind of rinse and repeat, back to the fiddly, and round we go. And the subject coordinator, the subject leads this processes. So we're really at a place now where all the subjects are developed, and we try and only make what we would sort of call minor changes, tweaking the readings, making sure it's up to date, changing Zoom links, that sort of stuff. And then working through now, well, what would a major review look like and when might we do it? That's sort of the next step of the project. So in terms of working with a third party, so as I said, it wasn't something we did in terms of the learning design very much. And overall, it was a positive experience, but we're still learning. Our experiences in working with KeyPath were really around marketing and student support. And so that's more the space that we ended up collaborating with. What's the story we're trying to tell about this course and about these subjects? Who's the audience? What marketing materials would be appropriate? All of those sort of things. And this sort of work in this OPM space is quite new, reasonably new in UTS. So often the processes and policies were not settled yet, and we're still working through those. So it's very much a live issue. Things around extensions, for example. If it's only 6 weeks, how long can you really extend for? We have to have the marking done within 1 week. So adds extra pressure to those sort of questions. I may have mentioned this before, that there were lots of stakeholders. We probably mentioned it a few times, which is great when it goes well, but occasionally if something doesn't go so well, it's a bit like, well, who did that bit? How do we fix that? And things would there were quite a few levels of people involved, when sometimes some feedback came back that maybe wasn't what we'd hoped. So let's say not complete autonomy. We complete autonomy in terms of the content and sort of structure and those sort of things, but there were some of those constraints. Obviously it's 6 weeks, the marking has to be done in a certain amount of time, so that then makes you think about, well, how are the assessments written? Things like that. So the format and expectations then presented some constraints, and really made us then think a bit harder about, well, what's the goal of this? The Zoom sessions are a good example. So if they're optional, what then can we do with them? What would be the most productive thing for students to make them want to come? So we had the goal of consistency across subjects. Sometimes we got into conversations where maybe one subject it was not as appropriate for, and so then we would sort of have these conversations where, well, maybe for this one subject we don't want that level of consistency, but then the philosophy was that we did, and so we needed to negotiate there. And it was a very different way of teaching and learning, and it still is. It's very intensive. It happens very quickly. So if there's an issue with student learning, you've got to get on it right away. So it's been quite a steep learning curve for the teaching team. So one of the things I kind of promised in the blurb for today was talking about some of our key challenges and key lessons from the whole process, which I think we all breathed a really big sigh of relief when it was implemented and the last one went live. So I guess there were a few challenges, but if we were to summarize them, the first one, sort of the far left there with the laptop photo, how can we present all of this content and activities in an accelerated 6-week, asynchronous, completely online format? How do we take what we had before? What can we repurpose? What should be new? How can we give it some structure to help students navigate through this? There's sort of two paths diverging in the wood in the middle. How can we offer a high level of customization for students? That's something that we always had in the degree previously. We wanted to maintain it. And then also, how do we continue to provide very research-inspired, integrated opportunities for students really to learn these cutting-edge, theories as well as industry perspectives that they've come back to uni to learn. So the lessons, and I'll go into each of these in a bit more detail. First one was about creating these consistent learner experiences in the asynchronous space. So having a trajectory, but not necessarily a step-by-step path. In the middle, I've kind of got the good old choose your own adventure books. So how do we support that personalized and customized learning? And we have some strategies we came up with for that. And then so the jigsaw puzzles at the end there is the importance of really leveraging the collective expertise of the teaching team and of all of the other teams that we were working with at the time. So the first one, and I kind of like the little tagline in red that goes with this: one flow but not one pace. So in terms of trying to create some consistency, our solution has been really to signpost the means for students to set and check their own pace. So in the design, we signal to students when to test their understandings so they can determine whether to move on or revisit some clear ideas or key ideas. Teachers reply to online activities and questions also to support student learning. And we also use things like, we call them want more cues, which is the little drop down box at the bottom of a page. And if you click on it, it has more readings or media content if students want to do a deeper dive into a topic, for example. And we also have dedicated assets that were designed in collaboration with the learning design team. So things like pre-recorded content. So sort of say video lectures, but actually we tend to call them concept videos, no more than sort of 3, maybe 4 minutes, for literally key concepts or explanations. We also use podcasts quite a bit, particularly if we're doing interviews with industry folks. And they also work very differently in a fully online course. So in our subjects, that sort of content works powerfully with interactive activities and tools to personalise and support student learning in that way. And what matters here is that we signpost, ensuring that students know what they should be able to do with the content and ideas that we're presenting to them. And across the suite of the nested courses, so the Masters and the Graduate Certificates, the modules in each subject are structured quite consistently to provide students with familiar navigation, options, and that signposting that empowers them to then navigate it at their own pace and with their own particular focus. And at the same time, we needed to think creatively about how to support students to achieve the unique learning objectives of every different subject. So subjects which are more project focused, so like the learning design subject I mentioned earlier, for example, they rely upon scaffolded learning, encompassing both formative and summative assessment and feedback to enable a high proportion of work to actually happen away from the Canvas subject site. And also we've got an entry-level subject in our graduate certificate in education. So it's one of the first 4 subjects students do. I should point out students can technically jump into any subject. So it's not like we necessarily had an easy first one to work with. But we've actually embedded academic support in that subject and in other places to support students transition into postgraduate study, sometimes after quite a long hiatus from study altogether. So taking a cumulative and holistic approach to transition and engagement, we also use learning partners. We encourage students to form mutual inquiry groups and other collaborative peer learning opportunities to empower students to make connections and support one another, which was particularly important in the online-only space. So overall, we really learned that teacher presence makes a world of difference online. And even though there's an ideal trajectory through each subject, with its timing arranged around a sort of 7-week period, so 6 weeks plus an orientation week, we're also really mindful that students have different learning interests and needs that are going to impact on their progression. And as such, they'll move through the online subjects with different intensities, at different speeds, different levels of catch up, and that we also need to acknowledge that. So in terms of our sort of second lesson, kind of like the subjects aren't going to teach themselves, which well we know. So some of the challenges that we had, so when designing the course and the subjects, we really wanted to continue with the high level of customization that we'd had in the previous blended version of the course. And we also wanted to draw on our knowledge about supporting students that we'd learned from those years of face-to-face delivery and design and teaching in the teaching of the online subjects. And so some of the questions then that we started to ask ourselves were, how do we provide high support for personalised learning without simply just creating a barrage of discussion boards and comment boxes? How do we encourage balanced participation and appropriate level of teacher interaction so scaffolding isn't simply a response to those who comment the most? How do we detect the difference between a quiet but keen listener and a struggling and at-risk student without the cues we might rely on in a face-to-face class? And how can you be available without cultivating dependency and expectations of some sort of infinite capacity of teachers to respond? So in terms of how we might have addressed that, we're lucky in a way as a team. Adult learning is our collective area of expertise. And because students are working through activities and content so quickly, we know that the need for regular and high-value online teacher presence is even greater. This is particularly important for students who come from non-traditional backgrounds. For example, our cohort includes a lot of mature age students who are either looking to return to the workforce or are already very professionally successful, but may not feel academically prepared or confident. Many of the things that we took for granted when we were working in face-to-face contexts then vanish, including our capacity to build some of those more personal connections and provide targeted feedback and support. And so we needed to try and build in those opportunities as much as possible. Through our experiences over the last year or so, we've learned the importance of building explicitness into the design of our subjects, including about the purpose of interactive features. Some are key points where students can expect feedback from their teachers, so we might actually have a discussion board where we'll say, this one's related to your assessment, this one we're going to give you detailed feedback on, but then we might have another discussion board where we say, this is really an opportunity for peer discussion, and your teachers will be a little less visible here. And we also use online tools, things like Microsoft Whiteboard and Padlet and Miro boards, to provide more opportunities for collaboration and interaction, and Miro boards, for example, for templates for different things as well. And trying to use a variety of what we might call high-tech and low-tech as well. And another form of teacher presence that we talk about too is the sort of less obvious concept of teacher talk that accompanies readings and interactive assets. So part of being explicit, explaining to students in a very conversational sort of text, and sometimes in video or podcast format, here's the next reading, here's why you're reading it, here's how it links in, and here's some things to think about as you do, for example. Or there's an interactive coming up and it's going to show you XYZ theory. Crucially though, no obvious substitute exists for the personal presence of teachers. And what we learned was that it took a number of these interrelated measures to ensure enough teacher presence. So we had the Zoom sessions, of which there's usually about 4 per session, and that enabled teachers and students to check in with one another in powerful ways. And it provided opportunities for students to get to know each other and to share their ideas and professional experiences too. So then that also promotes a sense of belonging. They're also structured in a way to enable students to test their thinking, discuss some of the key concepts they're learning, and for teachers to check understanding. So while online student feedback for assessment as well can be text-based, we've also found as part of that connection that incorporating audio feedback or video feedback promotes personalization and connection and enhanced learning. And in fact, in cases where there's been a tech problem and we couldn't upload a video, the students really commented, wait, where's my video feedback? I really enjoy that. So it's really about letting our students know that we care about their individual learning journeys and success, even in a large online cohort. So some of our cohorts could be up over 100 people, and some of the smaller ones down around 30 or 40, so quite a range. And the last one, this idea of collective expertise, and I've said a few times, it really takes a team. And that's really one of the key lessons we've learned. So as a teaching team, we relied heavily on the expertise of our learning design partners who helped us imagine and build online assets that could provide variation and some of that scaffolding that I was talking about. So that design team co-designed with the academic teaching team focusing on the learning experience, ensuring the structure and alignment of the course, and guiding the process of developing quality online resources. The learning designers also work closely with the academics to review materials, organise the production schedule, and focus our combined efforts and attention. And this close partnership also meant that the learning design team could take on the role of critical friend and provide another perspective and viewpoint, which was incredibly valuable. We also benefited from reaching out to our own community and industry contacts, both to help generate authentic content, but also to stress test some of the key ideas being presented in subjects and assessments. Most importantly, we've learned to work even more closely and collaboratively across the course teaching team. The fact that we have a long history of working together and understand how customization works through our subject-specific learning goals, and it helped us to help one another. We walked through each other's subjects as though we were students. We discussed and tested teaching innovation ideas together. And we also had the privilege of alumni who are industry experts in having them walk through subjects, as well as in some cases to co-design the subjects with us. And so, when you've spent hundreds, like literally hundreds of hours fully immersed in writing Canvas pages, it can be quite hard to see the wood for the trees. And dilemmas come up frequently between maintaining that consistency with the other subjects and tailoring specific content to best introduce it. Things like, how do we afford students the trust and freedom they need to personalise their learning while also ensuring that that learning is tightly scaffolded. And so as a teaching team, we really depended on one another because of our shared expertise in the whole of course approach and content. And we've also developed new shared expertise, figuring out how to transform our teaching into this sort of challenging but exciting OPM online space. And we've also used the whole of course processes to help students see the connections between subjects. And one student actually commented, I've got a quote here from our student survey, "Many theories I had visited in other subjects continue to resonate with me, and I developed a deeper understanding of their meaning and the potential insights they could provide to my professional practice." And so because we were collaborating, we could identify where we were using the same approaches or theories or materials, and then link back and forth between the subjects. So even though students might be doing them in a different order to one another, they could still say, oh, okay, I did this in an earlier subject, I can use that again here, kind of stuff. So where to from here? We're all taking a bit of a break, frankly, just actually getting used to teaching these subjects. But, I think our hard work's really paid off. We've had excellent student feedback. The main comments for improvement when they've come through have been clarity around assessments, and we continue to tweak and refine that. Students being students, they want to know exactly what's required, and we're still working through how to best give that to them in each case. And we get feedback as well in which modules, in which subjects students feel like they were a bit heavy, if you really expect us to do it in a week. So that's been fantastic real-time feedback that we wouldn't have known until we launched it and we had people really working through the subjects. So we're really at the moment in a sort of a maintenance, continuous improvement mode. So like the design process I was talking about, minor changes, in each session. And we're now working through the idea of, well, what would constitute a major change? And at what point do we think a subject might need a larger refresh beyond just updates? And so that's sort of an evolving discussion that we're having. So overall, it's a lot to talk about our very big year, but thank you for the opportunity to talk it through and make some sense of it, and really happy to talk through any questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that. That was very, very impressive as well, and quite a lot of work and cross-collaboration, a cross-disciplinary team has been involved as well, which is quite impressive to get that done. I would love to open the floor to questions and comments for Amanda. We have Rosemary. Go for it, Rosemary. Feel free to take the mic.
Thank you. Amanda, I was wondering, do you ever have any issues with students who can't relate the material to professional practice because they're not working or some other kind of disruption to their career?
Yeah. From time to time we do. And that's always been the case for the way that we structure things. And so there's a couple of things we do there. So depending on their situation, they might choose in different subjects to focus on different things. So they might revisit a project they did at a previous job. They might look to part of the customization I talk about is we have a process called the capability wrap. So students, as part of the whole course, actually reflect on what are they hoping returning to study will do for them, and what are their course goals, and then in every subject we get them to set subject goals. And so we might get them to reflect on that and think about, well, where am I hoping this will take me? And so they could focus on future situations. Sometimes we'll give a case study if they're really struggling, and sometimes people will use their volunteer work because it's still relevant. As we always say to the students, it's not what you choose for your example that's really the issue. It's a vehicle for your learning. It's a vehicle to show what you've understood. So we're not too fussed. You could make up the whole thing really if you want. We don't need to know. We just need, you know, something that you can apply it to as you go. So we have a few different mechanisms for students who find themselves in that position.
That's an amazing answer. Did you just refer to a course capability map?
We call it the capability wrap. And it's something, yeah, it's been a part of the course since it was first redeveloped from the old Master of Education in 2016. And actually my colleagues Donna Rooney and Anne Reich and Nick Hopwood were sort of the leaders on that one. But yeah, it's really kind of, I suppose as its most basic, I would describe it as a very fancy way of setting learning goals. But it's embedded across the entire course. And in one of the final subjects students do, we've structured it so they do sort of capstone. Part of that capstone is a very extensive reflection process on each subject they've done. So we call it a wrap because you set learning goals at the start, and at the end of each subject you wrap it up by going, okay, well, how did those goals go? Did I meet them? Did I learn something new? Was I challenged? These sort of comments. And then they pull it all together at the very end in this capstone.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comment, or otherwise I might put my hand up to ask you a question, Amanda. All right, I think I might give it a go. So others who would like to comment or question, please follow through as well. So Amanda, would love for you to comment on how your team or yourself have incorporated inclusive and equity and accessibility, principles across your design as well. So that's a pretty, a key topic of conversation nowadays. So if you could comment on that, how your team went about doing that and putting that into your course design and delivery. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think this is where it was fantastic to have the additional expertise of the postgraduate learning design team as part of it, because they have a lot of built-in processes for this sort of thing that they're also background checking. But I mean, the most basic level things like every video is captioned. There's always a transcript provided. There's always alt text, those sort of very basic level things. In terms of like language and literacy and those sort of areas and academic literacies, that's actually been an interesting one. We try and build in, we've got a few things. So all of our assessments actually have, we call it a pillar, but a framework built in. So every assessment's actually got that built into it. So we're actually checking people's language and adoption of these sort of literacies every time they submit something, as well as how we've built some of the activities. And I think sort of my answer from before, in terms of like how we accommodate people and their different needs is also another way. But also, to be honest as well, it's a little bit on the fly. And I'm happy to give this example because it was a wake-up call for me. I thought I've been doing this a long time and put together, we've got an evaluation subject, and there's a bit about data visualization, and thought, okay, that's great. I got called out. We had a visually impaired student who said, look, I'm just saying, even using the word visualization, I don't visualize, not in the way that you understand. I said, okay, that's completely fair. And so then he helped. Then I sort of collaborated with him and went, thank you for raising that. What can we, and then so actually added a second page after that to go, what's the problem with the first one? And you're going to be presenting your evaluation findings to people who are saying, and so we also try and build in some of those things that we talk about UDL, and we talk about accessibility, diversity throughout the subject. So there's a few different ways that we've tried to build it in, but it's ongoing. We find little, like my little landmine, you find them as you go and then go, oh, can't believe I missed that. Let's fix it. Let's do it better next time.
Yeah, that's right, because you mentioned continuous improvement and enhancement quite a bit as well, especially towards, the end where you look at looking at student feedback and looking at ways that we can improve that going forward. Well, that's fantastic. Thanks, Amanda. We do have a question or comment by Matthew Hillier as well. Let me just read it out. Would like to, if you can comment on how or what you would see this applying to undergrad programs. Some things may translate and others may not. If you have any comments on that.
Well, that's an interesting one, actually, because I must admit I've only very rarely taught undergrads. So I've tended to work in the postgrad space. I think probably the thing we found, this is probably the case pre-OPM when we had more international students, was we actually have a requirement that you need at least 2 years of work experience to join the course. And I think that would be a bit of an issue because we rely so heavily on people having some kind of experience. If you have people who come straight from school, I think that would present some challenges in the way that we've designed it, because it's built so heavily around this idea of professional practice. So you'd have to find ways, I think, to simulate that more than, say, reflect on. It would be more like, here's a situation, which I know a lot of undergrad courses do really well. Like I've seen some good examples where, you know, they'll work on a live project, that kind of stuff. Because of the time constraints, we don't tend to do that. There's not really enough time in the 6-week arc. Although, then again, I know Keith does that, so it can be done in his subjects.
Yeah. So slightly different as well. And Matthew just adds on a bit. Obviously, with undergraduate programs, there could be potential that there is more students in there, more students to discover their motivations, you know, whether they're more self-directed or more motivated to learn, etc.
Well, the thing, we get people who are vast majority already, they've chosen their career, they're in it, they've been doing it for a little bit, and they kind of have a perspective on where they want to go in that career. Whereas I think, I mean, not all undergraduates, because sometimes people come back to undergraduate study as an older student, but if you had students who come straight on from school, they may have a less formed idea of their professional identity compared to what our students would have. So we can leverage that quite a bit, whereas I think in undergrad you would have very different discussions around that sort of thing.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask another one, but Keith, if others want to chime in, please feel free to. I'm very curious on this aspect, and you did touch upon this probably across your presentation, but I'm keen if you've got in more to add to it. Obviously, with the move from, you know, the fast, rapid movement as well, but then there's quite a lot of things that you've put in. I'd love for your comments on the quality assurance process as well. What kind of process you've taken? Are there any key components of the quality assurance process that are important to your team when looking at this, converting this? Yeah,
definitely. So I think a few things. So very much having a team development process to make sure that it wasn't just, you know, one person's plan. Getting to, I think, having the kind of proof of concept early on, so kind of looking at what a module might look like and the structure would look like, help to visualize that. Certainly towards the end of the design process, getting lots of different stakeholders to look through the subject. So other teachers, industry representatives, former students who also kind of worked in industry or who might end up teaching it, to all give different points of view. And that was really good, because then they could say, God, yeah, there's a lot on that page, or I can't read that, or I don't understand what you mean, and all those sort of things. And then really importantly, the postgraduate learning design team runs a full QA where their whole team goes through it and looks for broken links and all of those sort of user experience sort of testing at the end as well. And then, of course, because I used to work in pharmaceuticals, so I always remember they used to say when you launch drugs, you find out about some of the reactions after it goes live, and it's a little bit like that with subjects, I think. So getting that student feedback each time, saying, oh, we don't understand this bit, or we need to change that, so that getting into that continuous improvement part of it. So quite a few touch points for that sort of QA stuff.
No, that's great. No, excellent. I think that's really good, and I really quite impressed and really appreciate the co-design aspect to putting this course together as well. Keith has asked a wonderful question as well. Keith, if you want to take that question.
Yeah. Obviously, I know Amanda really well, and a big admirer of the work that she and her team have done. But I want you to draw on your research as well as this experience, and do a bit of crystal ball gazing. So you've worked a lot with KeyPath, and you spoke a little bit about some of the tensions, and you also worked with the postgraduate learning design team, and you spoke about those tensions. So is this going to be the future of higher education, these kind of external partnerships, or, what do you reckon?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I'm never normally short for an opinion. It's interesting because I know in like the UK and the US, this is a really hot topic. It's a little newer here. I don't know. It serves a purpose in some ways. Like, I think it definitely brought our course to a many more students. I've actually got a map in some of the reporting I get, and I can see, we used to just be like people who could physically get to campus. Now there's like a cluster of people in Cairns, and they actually get together now and meet, and people in Perth and people from regional areas who didn't get the opportunity to come before. So it certainly opened it up in that way. Probably the thing, more in terms of the third party, I think the online learning, like anywhere could in theory do that with the right tools. But the third party part that's probably made a difference is their focus on the marketing. And then there's a student support component. So they are very much all about, they kind of know how to work the social media and all of those bits to get that, what do you call it, the funnel kind of going of getting the students in the door. So that's where that bit is a real contribution. Whether or not, I don't know if you want it to happen for absolutely everything. You might kind of saturate the market. I don't know. I mean, the other thing that they do is kind of the student support. So there's student success advisors, they're called, and they will ring students, check in with them. There's sort of a point of contact students can ring that takes some of that, not all of it, but a bit of the pastoral work, I suppose you'd call it, that the teachers used to do. So the teachers kind of can focus on content, assessments, that sort of stuff. And then there's this sort of other group of people. So in terms of being the future, I think for some, I think in postgrad space, it makes a lot more sense. I think to the earlier question, I don't see it as being quite as useful in an undergrad space where people are looking, I think, in what I've seen for that more on-campus student experience type thing. Because we tend to get, the busy professional, I'm a school principal and I don't have a lot of time, but I can handle, working at my own pace. So, there go people working in the undergrad space. So maybe, I don't know, I just haven't worked out in that space. But yeah, is it the future? I don't know. They said MOOCs were the future. I take it all with a grain of salt.
So that's great comment. I think, because I work for a University of Latrobe as well, and we've got strong partnerships across different areas as well. And we are dabbling in that area as well going forward. But my experience, I've seen whether you use local existing university services, TNL services, or external services, I think at the end of the day is one, it comes to the expertise within the teams as well. I've noticed that external services do have probably a more stake in that business to business market as well. Well, depending on the course, your course is in it's in education, etc. I'm dealing with different courses, different disciplines as well in that space. So they may have more of a market share, more of a reach, more of a network in that space. But definitely that's a tough question, Keith, at the moment. But I think nearly every single institution is dabbling into that space as well. So it's very timely, this presentation. We've probably got one more, just probably a couple of minutes for one more question or comment. If not, I'm more than happy to draw this to a close and really want to say thank you so much, Amanda, for taking your time to really share the lessons learned in quite detail as well that we could use to go on within our institutions, because we have academic developers and learning designers and professional folks in this room as well that could have learned, I'm sure, for me as well, working in this space at the same time. But thank you so much, Amanda, for your presentation. It's fantastic, and thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Just quickly, we do have the next month, we have another presentation coming in. So please, we're looking forward to seeing everybody in the next month in September as well. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Amanda. Well done. That was great.
Thank you. No worries. Enjoyed it.